have to have a holistic approach. That's going to be my overarching theme here. You have to be able, in a role like this, to understand where are all of people coming from so that you can address the concerns and you can help move forward at the same time.
Hi, I'm Shannon Lucas. I'm one of the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to catalyzing innate change makers to accelerate positive change.
And I'm Justin Scott Campbell. I am a DEI consultant and leadership executive coach.
This is our podcast, Catalyzing a Culture of Inclusion, where we highlight catalysts who have taken the brave step of moving into DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, leadership in large organizations.
We hope this mini-series is a space of learning, encouragement, and ultimately community and connection. If you're new to DEI and or the world of Catalyst, we hope you'll enjoy.
I'm so thrilled to have back on our podcast, Giselle Mota. She's an amazing, inclusive futurist and thought leader focused on enabling inclusion as it relates to product design, the future of work, and all things emerging tech, including XR, Web3, and the metaverse. She serves as the Chief of Product Inclusion at ADP, where she leads DE&I throughout the 200 plus product portfolio. She's also the creator of the Nifty Collective, which focuses on bringing disability inclusion into Web3 and metaverse. And I'd love to unpack too about your role of the Chief of Product Inclusion. But let's start, Giselle, with, how do you relate to the concept of Catalyst, particularly in your role as an inclusion leader?
I think it's important to kind of see where connection points are before people can see them. And I catalyze that. I'm being able to look at a regular process that is tried and true, such as human capital management, or the processes from when an employee starts and they're hired from the time that they retire, succession. How do you look at that in a new way and apply a lens of inclusion to it? And I'm kind of disrupting the space in a positive way, with being able to say, hey, let's look back at this and let's really insert ourselves in the shoes and the lived experiences of other people to see how can we rethink what this experience is like.
And we got a chance, obviously, to chat a little while ago. And like I said, your title's so interesting and there's not that many of them. And as you told me your story, your origin story, even about this role, is so catalytic. Can you explain a little bit more about what this role does and how you ended up here?
Sure. So the role is all about designing for all people. And that sounds very simple to say in one little sentence with a few words, but it's very complex, because how do you design for all people? Is that truly realistic? Can you attain that? You can try, and you can try to get close to it. So usually when we design with a user or a persona in mind. Many people who design and they're in the product management space, that's how they go about it. They think about a target market. They think about who is that target market, break it down to a persona, and let's design for them. I'm saying that persona is so much more nuanced and so much diverse than what we realize. And we need to be designing, because that person can be an individual who's left-handed and needs to use your product, or they speak different languages. They live in different parts of the world. They identify as LGBTQ+. They are of a different faith practice. They have a disability. There's so much, you can go on and on and on. And it's not even just one thing. People are not a monolith. You have people who intersect many different things. And so thinking about how do you create technology in a way that's flexible and adaptive enough and considerate enough to value those people. That's the role. The way I got into it really was, it's a personal thing. Like, before I was working in the future of work, I think when I was talking to you last, I was the principal consultant for the future of work. So I was telling people about AI and machine learning and data analytics and automation, all these things, and how they could use it to be more efficient and think about the future of work, the workforce, and the workplace. Great, right? That's awesome. However, I was like, you know what? With everything that happened during the pandemic, how it showed the inequities societally, how racial and social injustices were happening, I wanted to do more. And I said, well, how am I using my time? And one of the things that I came to, just kind of a moment, was I want to show organizations how to be more inclusive, in the future of work, not just how to enable it and how to be, innovative in it, but how do you intentionally use that innovation, drive inclusion? And I want to create a future of work truly that is diverse, equitable, inclusive for all people. And that's my ethos. And so I built a business case shared it with the company. It just so happened at the time that our technology company was thinking about the same thing when I did. And so the timing was perfect, the synergy was there, and thus the role was created.
Amazing. I hope that Catalysts are listening to, like, you don't have to wait for the role to be there necessarily. I mean, if you're sensing the signals about what is emergent in the organization and you make a strong business case, it is actually possible to create the roles where we want to drive impact.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you have kind of taken on this role, Giselle, what are like one or two essential skills that have made you successful as a catalyst doing this work? And maybe even some stories that illustrate how these skills were useful for you, or maybe times where you're like, you know what, I wish I had that skill, because if I had had it, things may have gone differently.
I'm going to start with that latter one, because that's a really good point. Yeah. I wish I would have had so I have had the futuristic kind of view, and so I'm going to answer kind of two questions in one, because that's how catalysts do, right? So we're just going to like merge all this stuff together. So I'm going to say, you have to have a holistic approach. That's going to be my overarching theme here. You have to be able, in a role like this, to understand where are all of people coming from, so that you can address the concerns and you can help move forward at the same time. I'm with a company that's been around for 70 something years at this point. This is a new role. This is not something that we can emulate from a lot of different companies. It's new. And with new comes change. With change comes the need to communicate. And you need to learn how to communicate where people are. So I need, and I work with legal, marketing, sales, service. I work closely with compliance and privacy teams. I work with the data office. I work with so many different people to accomplish one goal. And you have to understand how to speak to those people. You have to know what matters to them. So it's the business acumen you have to have. What matters to them? Where are they coming from? And because many times, even when someone will come to you and say, hey, I have a question, I kind of don't agree with this. Where are you coming from, Giselle? What's happening? That's helpful, because it makes you pause and you're like, okay, wait, I hadn't considered it that way. Now I can function from their lens. And when I know where they're coming from, I can meet them where they are with what I have. So part of this is that. The other part of the skill that I would say for people to have is keep an eye on the present, what you're working on, but you have to have an eye in the future. I am very keen to what's happening competitively, what's happening in society, legislation, what's happening in the market. So you have to know what's happening and coming in the world of DE&I, for example, so that you can then take it back to what you're trying to create in a product. So it's a lot. Your brain is in a lot of different places at the same time. And I need a vacation. Just
yes. And we talk so much on this podcast about self-care and taking care of ourselves and wellness. In terms of like doing this work, you just named a lot of stakeholders, a lot of processes over a large company. What kinds of supports do you have in place to help you do that? Or, what kinds have you seen be helpful or maybe not helpful as you've attempted to manage and see all these things at the same time?
The number one thing that comes to mind when you were saying that is I have had to be resourceful, which means I don't need to know all the answers. I need to know the people who know the answers and point me in the right directions. So one of the key things that I've done and been able to do, thankfully, is that there are so many good people at my company that know things that I don't know, and that they get the vision. So my role has been to share the vision, to communicate that vision effectively so that people could see what's in it for us as a company and why does this matter. Once they capture that, then they come with their excellent, resources, their excellent expertise, and they're helping me to build what we're building. It's not me on my own. There's a group of people who know how the business works in and out. They know what the clients need in and out. They know legislation in and out. These are these certain areas that I'm not a professional in, but they are. So that, like, being able to be resourceful, bring the right people to the game, to the table, and they're helping push this forward in ways that I would never, as one individual, be able to push forward.
I'm wondering if there's a time that you can share. I love the holistic approach, and it's such a specific call out. Like, there are things underneath that we've talked about with other leaders about the communicating and the identifying shared value, but thinking at that holistic systems level, and connected to that where you landed, which is you're not doing it alone. So like actually the holistic approach is the execution. I'm wondering if you have a time when like that didn't work and what that looked like that helped you get to the place that you're at today.
I guess the place that it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked sometimes, is when I'm way ahead of where anybody else can see. And that takes a lot of work. So I've had to sometimes be in the position where I'm legitimately still selling why something is important. And sometimes I've been in the situation where I've said something and no one has moved to action about it. And it's because I saw it coming from a mile away. I saw something happening. I won't get into too much of the detail because, we talk about my company and all that good stuff, but but I will say that I saw something coming down the pipeline 2 years before it came down the pipeline, before it became a trigger event in legislation, before it became something that we were going to have to do. I saw that we should have been doing it. I tried to talk to the right people about it and really get the buy-in. But sometimes as a business, we need to prioritize what we invest in. Resources, time, finance. You can't just go off of, hey, I see this coming and we should do something about it. Sometimes we do have to wait for the trigger event to happen, and then we have to be reactive. I would love for us to get to a point, and when I say us, it's our company, but it's also an industry, right? And how people do business. I'd love for us to tap into kind of more catalyst thinking as a whole, and recognize when you have those voices and that perspective in the organization that they're telling you, so that you can get ahead of something before it ever becomes an issue, and you can innovate and you can be the first and you can really make a difference and lead as an example instead of always being reactionary. So that's one point where I hope I answered that question.
No, totally. And what I hear, because part of the reason we ask the question is so that people can do sort of a check, like, am I at that place right now where it's not working? Right. And the clarity of the thing that you shared that I heard was, it's sort of like those moments when you're in the room and you say the thing and it's like blank looks, or like you're running into resistance all over the place because you're just too far ahead right now. Mm-hmm. And that is why you have to go back to the holistic approach of understanding the shared value, finding the expertise. And it's a lot of emotional labor, to Justin's point, which is like, how do you sustain yourself? And I think it's really smart, finding the resources. You don't have to do it. And in fact, if you try to do it on your own, you will fail and burn out, right?
And also knowing that everything's doesn't have to be done today. Sometimes you may see something in advance, and I will share this with you too, as a catalyst and as a person. By the way, this forum makes me feel so seen. I thank you all, as my mind goes in 100 different places, and now I understand that that's a catalyst, right?
Yes. So anyway,
I predicted, and I will say this because there's a talk that I gave, and so that I gave a TED talk in 2018. In about 2019, I gave a talk in a forum of CIOs and CTOs, and my conversation was about the future of artificial intelligence. What I was saying at that time is that we'll get to a point where AI and machine learning will be able to have conversations with it. We'll be able to prompt it and it'll tell us things. I said at that time that we'll be able to, have AI create things that we've never created before based on what we have already created, because it's using those data sets. So I predicted generative AI, and what we know today also as ChatGPT years ago. What do you do with minds like that can see something, that can see where things are heading, and like, how do you jump on that? And I think, part of that is also me knowing that you can see something, but sometimes you have to step back, let it breathe, let people catch up to it, keep putting in the resource, behind the scenes, and it'll come when it comes. And that has helped me pace myself with different things as well over time.
Yeah, letting go of that sense of urgency and creating space between us and the idea, because it can get so enmeshed in our identity because we feel it so deeply that, I love that. So what are the biggest challenges that you're facing today in your role?
I think it's ideologies. Sometimes we can talk about business all day long, but at the end of the day, when you talk about DE&I, and I think Justin and I were talking about this before a little bit, but when you talk about DE&I, it is something so enmeshed into people's personal identity that it is hard to not add human heart into this conversation. And sometimes it is very deep. So as much as we might, as an organization, and all people in the workplace all globally may want to do right by their employees, and they, we heard years ago talks about color blindness. It came from a good place. Right? It came from a place of, hey, let's see everyone for who they are. Let's look beyond differences, quote unquote. But when we have these type of, approaches, we forget the nuance. There's always something nuanced. It's more complicated than what we think. People are who they are, and part of what makes someone who they are is their cultural identity. It is the way they show up in their skin that they didn't choose to be born in. They were just born into that skin, that sometimes they are ostracized and attacked because of that skin. There's so much that goes into this, right? Things that people about them feel about themselves and things that they've experienced. There's a lot, and it's not just skin, it's language, culture, faith, everything, you name it, disability. So I think that it's a challenge when you approach topics that you're trying to sterilize so badly because you're trying to make everything about the all, and then you forget about the some. And I think that my challenge has been trying to always bring to the conversation, these topics do not have to be mutually exclusive. You can design for all people while designing for some people. And sometimes when you design for some people, you design for all people. Like Siri started because some people with disabilities could not use a keyboard, a keypad to type. And then we used voice. And all of a sudden, all of us are using voice because we like it, right? So that's what I'm saying. That is definitely a challenge.
Could you say a bit more about, you said you used the word sterilization. I'm curious what you mean by that, or what process you're describing when you say that.
The topic of D&I in my lens, this is Giselle's opinion here, but it has become so overspoken about, and people have tried to do things over and over again, sometimes to the detriment, sometimes there's failure, sometimes there's advances, but we are still at a point where it's difficult, right, to enact certain things. And it's a complex topic. Companies sometimes try to do what they can to move certain things forward without disrupting the masses, or just without disrupting people. And when you do that, it's difficult because you do end up leaving people out. You're trying to do something to be all inclusive, but you actually sometimes end up excluding people because of your approach. And that's when I talk about sterilization, when we're like, we're looking at all people, we're going to have a conversation about all people, and we're not going to look about, at these certain groups. That's what I'm talking about. Or when we get really comfortable talking, for example, about gender equity. This is a great example. We love to talk about men and women and gender equity. And then in that conversation, not recognizing that there's also some people who identify with a third gender because their culture has a third gender, like in Mexico innately, and in Canada there's a third spirit identity, and that goes years and years and years beyond our current time. And then you have current issues like people talking about non-binary individuals and transgender identity and all of that. When we don't make space for that, then we're kind of sterilizing the conversation when we're only saying women's rights and women's pay equity, and what about everything else? That's what I mean by that.
And so are there ways that you found that have been effective in pushing this work forward while also maintaining the fullness of it?
Yes.
At your company, or at places that you've been to talk to, or things like that?
Yeah, two ways. One is to do it from the lens of legislation. So I just gave an example about how Mexico, Canada, et cetera, that there are places around the world, even kind of in global examples, where another third gender or the gender X is used on passports and on identity cards and things like that. So there's actually a legal and a kind of a push there for ways in which people are identified. So it's not all about just saying, we need, go up in arms and say, we need to think about people with different gender identities and LGBTQ+. Well, actually, there are instances from a compliance and legal standpoint, and we're seeing even insurance companies move towards the direction of creating healthcare for people of different, non-binary gender types. And so they're having to account for that and how they bring in that information to their systems. So now we're talking about legislation, we're talking about, processes. That's that world. The other side of it to have the conversation is intersectionality. No one is just one thing. So when we think about an individual with disabilities, they may also be an individual from a different, sexual orientation category. They may be a person of a different race and ethnicity. They may have a different faith. We are all different things. So then we start looking at people from various angles. And that's another way to talk about it.
I love that in just as a quick note, because it's a way to invite people who might be otherwise hesitant or reticent to engage in some of these conversations, but working with their self-identity first to help them identify their other intersectionalities.
Yes.
Yeah, that's super powerful. I hadn't internalized that so deeply before. Thanks for that, Giselle. Justin, back to you.
Yeah. So as you think about some of the things that you do, we're going to do a rapid fire, just kind of go over some of these. This is the kind of, I guess, the fun part. But one of the rapid fire questions we have first is, what's one thing you do to be ready for a big meeting?
Do my homework, and the homework entails understanding who's in the room, who's there, right? Remember earlier I talked about, we got to know who is, what angles are people coming from? What's their perspective? I think it's very important. Like if you're talking to someone from finance, typically understanding, okay, what matters to that person? What matters to the legal person? Where are they coming from? What is their lived experience? And then I can tailor what I'm bringing to the table according to what they want to hear. And I think the other thing is really being true to not lose what my message is, because I'm trying to be all things to all people either. So I really need to get very strong on what my point is, what my message is, and make sure that I bring it in their perspectives in a way that they can digest, but still very true to what I am trying to bring to the table.
All right. Favorite way to spend a free day?
Oh, yes. Favorite data. You know what? Doing nothing. And nothing to me means it could be like getting lost in like amazing music. I love to discover global like world music. And I just like love that. Taking in nature, cooking myself an awesome meal because I love to cook. Like I love that kind of stuff. So I'm not always doing stuff. I know if people follow me on social media, they're like, does this girl ever sleep? Yes, people. I sleep and I just do nothing sometimes. That's how I balance myself. Get busy and then have moments, periods of doing absolutely nothing.
So you do have days, even though you have this crazy day job and the side project, you do have days where you do nothing.
I do, absolutely.
All right. So the third question is favorite famous catalyst, alive or dead, and why?
Oh, this is hard. I told Shannon this earlier. Okay, so I like a lot of different people for the different things that they bring. So I think of people like Oprah, right? I love Oprah. She's cool peeps. And I think I've seen from her being able to share to her personal story, to evolve with times, to be able to speak with people and create a platform and a space where all kinds of people have been comfortable to speak with her, even when she has completely personally disagreed with wherever they're coming from. I love that about her and how she's been able to like evolve with time, but always center herself. And not get lost in the fanfare. If you hear her with interviews, she'll say that she literally has like two friends, as famous as she is. So anyways, I love that. And then I love people like amazing musicians and inventors and all kinds of things, because I appreciate their craft. I appreciate that they don't care sometimes about who says what about them, and they just are true to themselves. I'm attracted to that in people. And I aspire to that. And one last thing, I can't think of someone off the top of my head, but anybody who's like I love older people. I love older women, especially because they get to a point in life where they're like, I don't care. I'm just going to be me. And that level of freedom, detaching yourself from societal expectations, I love it.
All right. Thank you for that.
Yep.
So as we begin to close out, is there a call to action that you'd like to share with listeners?
You know what? I'm going to tell people, like, try as much as you can to expand your tolerance, the band of your tolerance, the waistband of your tolerance, expand that, because this world is continuing to evolve and adapt, and people are so nuanced. I'm gonna give a quick example. Sometimes we think about organizations, and I heard someone tell me, hey, should we be designing these type of features? Because sometimes we have like a faith-based organization and they might not want certain features, like thinking about LGBTQ plus communities and things like that. Wrong. Do you know that, I've done some research and started looking and finding that even in some of these faith-based organizations, you have people within those groups that are leading efforts and they are of the LGBTQ plus community, or their families are and they support it. We are not a monolith. We intersect with so many different things. So I'm going to tell everyone out there, when you think of any group of people that you can think of, please know that within that group, there is such a paradigm and nuance and dimensionality of multidimensionality of people that don't fit into a perfect category of what you can be thinking. So expand the bands of your tolerance is what I'm going to say.
Well, thank you, Giselle. It's been so great to hear more about your work and everything that you're doing. And I know speaking for the both of us, are excited to continue to watch you lead from that visionary future from the front, calling us into a world that doesn't exist yet, both physical and digital. And thank you for sharing so much about your work with us today.
Thank you, Justin and Shannon. I appreciate you both.
And thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to accelerate positive change, go to our website at catalystconstellations.com.